My name is Virginia, and I'm a 40-year-old Kenyan woman living out here in the States with my husband Milford. Well, soon to be ex-husband, but we'll get to that juicy drama in a sec. Milford and I have been together for over 20 years at this point. Married right out of college when we were just dumb kids, really. I love that goofy boy to pieces. He had this big smile and an even bigger heart, you know. Just the sweetest, most caring guy you could ever hope to meet. We'd been through so much together by the time our 20th anniversary rolled around a few years back. Struggled with money problems, family drama, all types of crap that could have torn a couple apart if the love wasn't truly real. You feel me? But we'd somehow managed to weather every single storm hand in hand. A huge source of tension for Milford was definitely his parents, though. They were the stereotypical high-powered professionals who just had insanely lofty expectations for their only child. No matter what he did, it never seemed good enough for those two. Milford was smart as a whip, don't get me wrong. He'd breezed through college with a 4.0 GPA and had his pick of jobs fresh out of the gate. But he always seemed to buckle under the immense pressure his mom and dad piled on top of him to be even more successful. As if making 5 figures straight out of undergrad wasn't enough, you know. You gotta stop being so hard on yourself, baby. Your parents will never be satisfied no matter what you achieve. But I'm so proud of you and everything you've accomplished. I know. I'm being stupid again, letting them get in my head like this. It's just, I don't ever feel like I can live up to their impossible standards, you know. He'd beat himself up over it constantly, let the harsh criticisms and disapproving comments from his parents gnaw away at his self-confidence until he was pretty much paralyzed. It was like Milford could never appreciate his own immense talents and drive because those messed up people had instilled this toxic mentality in him from birth. Soon enough, he started tumbling into these depressive episodes where he'd be too scared to go into the office, too anxious and low on self-worth to be productive. He'd inevitably get let go from job after job during one of those downward spirals. He was basically sabotaging himself. Those first few times it happened, I tried being as supportive and understanding as humanly possible. I'd pick up a second low-wage job to help keep us afloat while Milford searched for a new gig during his break period. That's what we'd call it. A little stretch of time where he could reset his mindset away from that toxic family environment. And listen, I didn't mind doing that for him at all in the beginning. We were still young, didn't have any kids yet, and I knew he'd get back on his feet before too long. Milford was just too brilliant and capable for those depressive funks to keep him down permanently. But, well, you can probably see where this is going, right? Those little break periods started stretching out from weeks into months. Suddenly, I'd be juggling 2 or 3 jobs for years at a time, running myself ragged just to afford our tiny apartment. While Milford just sat around the house feeling worthless. He'd send out countless resumes and cover letters, book interviews galore, but as soon as the employer would dig into his work history, every single one would turn him away. Too many gaps in his employment, too many sudden resignations that were really him getting canned. He just couldn't escape that vicious cycle, you know. And the situation with his harpy parents certainly wasn't helping matters any. Milford was convinced that they were going out of their way to sabotage his career momentum behind the scenes, lobbying all their rich friends in powerful corporate positions to blacklist their son. Whether that was actually true or not, I'll never know for sure, but he believed it. It's those scumbags, I know it. They're trying to ruin everything for me. Just like they always do. Why can't they just be supportive for once? Baby, you don't know that for sure. Your parents can be overbearing jerks. But they're still your family. They wouldn't try to destroy your life like that, right? Trust me, babe, I can feel it in my gut. Maybe we should reach out to them, let them know that we need help. I can't keep juggling all these jobs on my own, babe. Reach out? Are you crazy? And let them win? They think I don't know that they have their fingers in all the pies I'm getting involved with. They want me to buckle and fall right into their trap of asking for help. I won't fold. I wanted so badly to believe that Milford's parents couldn't stoop to those depths. But if I'm being honest, those two always gave me slight sociopath vibes. They viewed their son as more of a status symbol than an actual person with feelings and aspirations of his own. Valuing appearances over his emotional well-being, too. Would they really go as far as smearing his professional reputation just to keep him in line under their toxic control? I hope not. At a certain point, though, I just got downright fed up with Milford's shtick. I even stopped believing in the whole "my parents are sabotaging me" bit. It was clear that they knew nothing about Milford's work endeavors, because if they did, they would have broken down our door and yelled at him for 3 days straight. We'd been struggling for years, scraping to get by while I worked myself to the bone. All because my husband had somehow convinced himself he was ill-equipped to handle the career his elite education had more than prepared him for. As the years rolled around, the quality of his jobs decreased. I mean, it made sense. No one wanted to hire the guy who was just mucking about. So it was crazy how this guy with a graduate and honors in business with a 4.0 GPA was struggling so hard to find even a managerial position in some warehouse or a factory. It was embarrassing and pathetic, but I stuck by my man because that's what you're supposed to do. The final straw came around Milford's 40th birthday. He'd landed himself a pretty decent gig at an investment firm, good pay, solid benefits, plenty of room for advancement. Definitely a step up from the last round of jobs he went through. I guess he really liked it in the interview because these guys were willing to take a chance on my husband. Could have finally let me stop killing myself at those low-wage jobs to make ends meet, you know. Things were supposed to be looking up, and I was thinking of retiring soon because I was so exhausted. But of course, leave it to Milford to get out of that situation too. Apparently, the big 4-0 had him going through some sort of midlife crisis or whatever. So he went ahead and got sloppy drunk at his office birthday party, making an absolute fool of himself. I wasn't there because my aunt had a flat tire and I had to help her with my uncle, shouting all kinds of obscenities, defaming the company and his co-workers loud enough for anyone within earshot to hear his drunken rants. Classy, right? Yeah, needless to say, the guy got himself fired on the spot the very next day. Zero tolerance for that kind of circus act. Nor should there be. His former bosses assured me they weren't going to take any legal action on account of his appalling behavior, because apparently it got really bad. He even tried streaking, but that's when he was finally stopped. I was so grateful for their grace, not taking legal action, because Lord knows we wouldn't be able to afford the legal fees. But you already know the damage was done. That incident would follow Milford's professional reputation around like a bad smell for the rest of his career. I've had it up to here with your crap, Mill, playing stupid games and throwing away every opportunity we get. Well, I am not enabling your pity party anymore. You think I'm not trying here, V? Those people don't want me to succeed. My parents, my dumb former employers, they'll convince everyone I'm damaged goods. Wake up. Your issues are your issues. You're the only one holding yourself back now. I can't keep cleaning up your messes while breaking my back to keep a roof over our heads. He tried blaming his family again, tried dragging up all those old workplace beef as excuses for why each job prospect fell apart before his eyes. But I'd heard enough of those flimsy sob stories to last me a lifetime. The truth was, Milford had somehow managed to fully internalize his parents' soul-crushing negativity to the point of becoming his own worst enemy. He was the only one sabotaging his own success anymore. Not those jerks who birthed him, not some evil corporation blacklisting him. Just Milford getting in his own way like he'd done a million times before, caving under the weight of expectations he couldn't stop piling on himself, no matter how much I reassured him. He just couldn't shake those destructive thought patterns. That was it for me. I put my foot down and said enough was enough. Either Milford got his stuff together and found steady employment ASAP, or things were going to get really ugly between us, as much as I loved him. I couldn't let him keep dragging me down into his pit of negativity and hopelessness. Well, sadly, my stubborn husband just wouldn't see the light. For the next 6 years, Milford somehow convinced himself that he'd never be able to find a job again after that investment firm debacle. He remained completely unemployed that entire stretch, not even bothering to seriously look for work or contribute to our household. I was out there putting in 60 to 70 hours a week between multiple jobs, doing everything humanly possible to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. Meanwhile, Milford just vegged out on the couch, binge-watching TV and slowly withering away into an empty husk of self-loathing. I should have kicked his butt to the curb right then and there, to be totally honest. Filing for divorce would have been the smart play after Milford flat out refused to get his life back on track as I demanded. But I just couldn't bring myself to dissolve our marriage, you know. Call it the sunk cost, fallacy, or just plain stupidity, but after 2 decades together, I somehow convinced myself things would turn around if I was patient enough. That my husband would snap out of this depressive funk eventually and become the man I fell in love with again. Yeah, I definitely should have stopped buying into that naive dream a long, long time ago, but I was stubborn about making this marriage work no matter what. Milford was stuck in a rut, but I kept telling myself his career woes were just a temporary hurdle we could overcome together through perseverance. That's what true love is all about, right? Being someone's rock when they're struggling, having their back even when the rest of the world turns on them. Maybe I'm just a hopelessly romantic idiot who gets too invested. Either way, we muddled through those 6 miserable years living off my meager earnings, with Milford contributing nothing but his ever-souring presence. I pleaded with him constantly to pull himself together, but he'd just wallow in that same self-defeatist mindset over and over again, utterly hopeless despite my reassurances. Finally, one random afternoon when Milford wasn't just loafing around the house in a depressive stupor, he decided to hit up his buddy's place nearby and get drunk because, of course, he did. Booze seems to be this dude's solution to everything, right? On his way home, stumbling through the neighborhood, plastered out of his mind, Milford got plowed into by a passing minivan. The poor sap went flying off the road, his body crumpling to the asphalt with a sickening thud as the driver peeled away from the scene. When I finally tracked down where my husband had landed, the county hospital's intensive care unit, it was a grisly scene to behold. His left leg was shattered in multiple places, requiring complicated surgery to set the bones properly. Various other bumps, cuts, and contusions littered the rest of his body. Worst of all was the bulging neck brace he had to wear to stabilize his damaged cervical vertebrae. Honestly, seeing Milford lying there attached to all those tubes and wires, groaning in agony with his eyes slightly askew, part of me worried he might not pull through at all. They told me he'd have to remain admitted for at least 2 months for treatment and recovery before he could hopefully be discharged. Now, I know what you are thinking. Why the hell did I continue busting my behind for this loser after he'd put me through the goddamn ringer for so long? Let his miserable carcass rot in the hospital bed and be done with it, right? Well, as furious and drained as I was from years of Milford's crap, I still loved him enough to stay by his side through those first few touch-and-go weeks. He was my husband for 2 decades, after all. For better or worse, I had to be there for him during what was undoubtedly one of the lowest points in his life. But my support certainly didn't come cheaply, if you know what I mean. Those hospital stays are expensive, even with decent insurance coverage. The surgeries, endless tests, overnight fees, medications, it all adds up tremendously in a real hurry. Like I mentioned, I'd been running myself ragged, working multiple jobs just to keep our household semi-afloat before Milford's accident. Now I had to really kick my hustle game into overdrive to afford his lengthy stint in the ICU. I picked up a second job, copywriting and being an assistant to a lawyer, then a third weekend side gig shopping for some bougie grocery delivery service. Suddenly I was pulling 70 to 80-hour work weeks in a desperate bid to keep that medical debt from piling up past the point of no return. My hourly pay from each of those jobs was an outright joke. But with all three incomes combined, I was finally able to start chipping away at those insane hospital bills little by little each month. It felt like I was just treading water constantly, you know, but at least I was keeping our heads above the surface for the time being. That soul-draining grind is honestly what made uncovering Milford's betrayal so much more gut-wrenching in the end. See, there was this one nurse who worked the overnight shift and was frequently tasked with checking in on my husband's recovery progress. A sugar-sweet young thing named Grace who couldn't have been any older than 23 or so. Whenever I'd come by the hospital during normal visiting hours, Grace was always the one providing me updates, both good and bad, on Milford's agonizingly sluggish healing process. I initially thought nothing of it, besides appreciating her stellar bedside manner and empathetic energy. Little did I know at the time the manipulative creep had been laying it on thick, trying to charm the pants off this pretty young nurse the entire time. While I was out there working upwards of 80 hours a week across 3 soul-crushing jobs to pay for his hospital stay, Milford was busy putting the moves on Grace. I should have picked up on the signs earlier, but I was just too focused on keeping my head above water. Whenever I'd visit Milford in the hospital, Grace would always make herself present, hovering over his bedside with this sickly sweet smile plastered across her face. At the time, I just interpreted her attentiveness as her going above and beyond in her job duties. Boy, was I painfully naive. It all came spilling out into the open one afternoon, just a couple of days before Milford's doctors had scheduled him for release. I had stopped by the hospital as usual to check in on his recovery progress. Only this time I caught the two of them bickering loudly in his room, something about us and what their future plans together would look like. At first, I thought maybe Grace was just trying to dissuade Milford from having unrealistic expectations of life after being discharged. But the longer I eavesdropped, the more I realized this argument carried way more heat than just a nurse gently leveling with her patient. I decided to make my presence known and interrupted their little quarrel, startling both of them as I entered the room with a stern look on my face. "Everything okay, Mills? I could hear you two going at it from down the hall." The way Milford shot Grace this panicked glare instantly set off alarms in my head, like he was a kid who'd just gotten caught drawing on the walls in permanent marker or something. The nurse seemed equally flustered, her cheeks flushing bright red as she searched for an excuse. "Oh, Mrs. Jameson, I'm so sorry you had to hear any of that. Your husband and I were just having a minor disagreement about his physical therapy routine. Please pay it no mind." "Uh-huh, physical therapy, huh? Is that what the kids are calling it these days?" I shot Milford a look that said, "You better start talking before my imagination runs wild here." Judging by his silence and inability to meet my gaze, I already had my answer. My stomach turned as the horrible truth started dawning on me. This damn nurse had successfully seduced my husband right under my nose, buttering him up while I was working myself half to death, taking care of his medical needs. I could feel hot tears starting to well up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall, not until I heard Milford confirm my suspicions. Himself. "You lying sack of crap. Tell me the truth, Mills. Have you been messing around with this girl behind my back?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I could see the shame and guilt riddled across his face before any words came out. Still, I needed to hear him audibly admit to his unfaithful transgression, plain as day. "Well, might as well come clean then, right, Grace? It's okay. We'll be okay." "What do you mean we'll be okay? What the heck is going on?" "We've gotten really close over the past few months while she was caring for me." My body went numb at hearing those words, as all the air had suddenly been sucked out of the room. My worst fears were brought to life right in front of me. I could feel Gracie's eyes burning 2 holes into the sides of my head, but I refused to so much as look in her direction. "I tried fighting these growing feelings I was having, but I don't know. My feelings for you haven't changed, V, but there's something undeniable between Grace and me that—" "Can it, Milford? I've heard more than enough of your BS excuses over the years." I raised a hand to silence him, feeling my rage reaching a boiling point with each syllable that oozed out of his filthy liar's mouth. How dare he? After everything I'd sacrificed for him, the literal blood, sweat, and tears I'd poured into keeping our household afloat all this time, and he has the audacity to cheat on me? "I'm not going home with you, V." My head was spinning as I struggled to fully process the depth of Milford's betrayal. Had he just been carrying on an emotional affair with Grace this whole time? Or had things actually gotten physical between them at some point too? Considering he'd be wheelchair-bound and utterly immobilized for months, the thought of him and this nurse going all the way seemed pretty far-fetched. But the way she was hanging on his every word, tenderly rubbing his shoulder throughout our spat, I couldn't be too sure, could I? I wanted to unleash years of pit-bottled anger and resentment upon them both right then and there, to bellow obscenities until my voice went hoarse while slapping that sheepish puss off both of their stupid faces. Part of me even pictured grabbing a nearby bedpan and smashing it across Grace's dumb smirk. Maybe give Milford a nice whack upside the head too, whilst I was at it, really drive the point home that he'd betrayed me in the worst way possible. But I stopped myself before doing anything too rash that I might forever regret. As much as they blindsided and disrespected me, stooping to physical violence wouldn't solve a damn thing. If anything, it would only make me look like the unhinged villain in this melodrama. So I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves before opening my mouth to respond. I needed to keep my wits about me in order to properly strike back at those 2 snakes in a way that really hit them where it hurt. "You know what, Milford? I'm not going to stand here arguing until I'm blue in the face. Let's just rip the Band-Aid off already." I turned to face Grace, staring directly into her eyes for the first time since entering the room. She was much prettier in person than I would have expected for a homewrecker. Slim figure, olive skin complexion, long dark hair pulled back into a ponytail. I could certainly understand the physical attraction, even if her personality seemed hollow and transparently materialistic. "You 2 lovebirds seem to have everything all figured out, so by all means go off, be together. Why don't you? Just don't go thinking for 1 second that it'll be on my dime." Milford's face briefly contorted in confusion at my surprisingly chill reaction. Grace just kind of smirked like she couldn't believe I was taking this all so calmly, like she'd already counted me out as some sad, resigned doormat of a wife. With all due respect, Mrs. Jameson, your situation with your husband is none of my business. Whatever happens next between you 2 is—" "Oh, cut the phony respect act, sweetheart. You forfeited all respect the moment you spread your legs for my husband. Honestly, how embarrassing for you. And listen, as hard as it's going to be, I am willing to take the high road here." I paused, trying to gather myself. I simply won't be paying another dime towards Milford's sky-high medical bills, not one single penny more after he so brazenly betrayed me with his shameless side piece over here. The look on Milford's face at that moment, panic, fear, sudden grave realization of what was happening, will forever be etched into my memory. Up until then, I guess the arrogant prick just expected me to keep footing the colossal bill for his recovery, no matter what went down between us. What an idiot. Well, wait, Virginia, you can't be serious. Those bills are tens of thousands of dollars. There's no way in hell I could cover all that on my own after being out of work for so long. Should have thought about that before jeopardizing our entire marriage then, shouldn't you? Grace tried interjecting with some snotty remark about how none of this was her concern, but I just ignored her. Milford kept sputtering and pleading with me, growing increasingly frantic. Baby, I'm begging you, please reconsider this. We can work through whatever issues come between us, but don't leave me to drown in medical debt over one stupid lapse in judgment. Stupid lapse in judgment? A lapse in judgment. Are you kidding me with this nonsense? That's not what you were saying last night. I had to laugh out loud at his pathetic attempt to downplay the situation as just a minor indiscretion brought on by too many painkillers or whatever lame excuse he could muster up. Nice try, pal. But I wasn't buying that load of bull for 1 second. From where I'm standing, this looks a lot more like a long, drawn-out campaign of infidelity on your part, Milford. One I can no longer tolerate or enable in good conscience. He opened his mouth to protest further, but I swiftly raised my hand to shut him up. I'd listened to enough of his sniveling for one lifetime already. No, you had your chance to do better, and you blew it. I've made up my mind. Our marriage is finished. I'll be filing for divorce first thing tomorrow morning and getting this financial burden off my hands for good. Let's pray that your little nursie over here can foot the bills. That is if she'll be having this job for long. What? Ma'am, like I said, this has nothing to do with... Oh, this has everything to do with you, sweetie. You think you're getting out of this scot-free? Right after I leave this place, I'll be reporting to your supervisor. Let's see how they handle their nurse being a grade A homewrecker. The room fell into this thick, palpable silence as my words seemed to really sink in for both of them. Milford looked utterly shell-shocked, like I'd just sledgehammered him in the gut. Grace just stared at me in sheer disbelief, clearly not expecting things to escalate so rapidly. But I wasn't quite done driving the full weight of their self-made crisis home just yet. After letting the gravity of my decision to divorce Milford sink in, I decided to twist the knife just a little bit deeper while I had them both squirming. Hey, can you blame me? This conniving pair had not only disrespected me as a wife, but pretty much destroyed any remaining dignity I had left. I was owed at least a few parting shots for the road. First up was my so-called husband, who was still blubbering and begging me to reconsider my stance on covering his astronomical medical debt. The sheer panic etched across his face told me he'd gotten way too comfortable relying on my income to fund his lifestyle. Well, that free ride was officially over. Don't even bother trying to grovel your way out of this one, Milford. I'm completely serious. You're on your own to figure out this financial catastrophe you've created yourself. But how, Virginia? You know I haven't been employed in years. There's no way I could ever pay off that kind of money by myself. Please, I'm broke. Not my problem anymore, dear husband. Maybe you should have thought twice about jeopardizing our marital security before betraying me with this. I gestured dismissively towards Grace, who had gone awfully quiet once the reality of the situation became clear. Up until then, she'd probably envisioned herself some kind of reformed trophy wife, set to live it up on Milford's hard-earned money while playing house with my soon-to-be ex-husband. Silly little girl who got in way over her head chasing after a broke middle-aged loser. Gracie's eyes widened with indignation at my insult, like she was actually offended by me calling out her home-wrecking ways. She opened her mouth to clap back at me with some immature zinger, I'm sure, but I didn't give her half the chance, shutting that nonsense down immediately. Save it, sweetheart. I'm not particularly interested in whatever meaningless high school drama you think you're a part of here. You're just a glorified side piece who got conned by this deadbeat into believing you'd secure the lifestyle you'd no doubt been desperately chasing. Milford kept trying to defuse the situation, assuring Grace that everything would work out fine once he could sign with a fancy big-shot lawyer to handle the divorce proceedings and protect his assets. As if either of them actually knew the first thing about legal realities in their stupid little fantasy world. Don't listen to her, Grace. Virginia's just lashing out because she's hurt right now. But I got plenty of money stashed away, more than enough to cover these bills and retire if needed. My parents have connections too that can make any pesky legal issues disappear. That's when I couldn't hold back my uproarious laughter any longer, cutting Milford off mid-sentence as I doubled over in a fit of incredulous hysterics. His desperation was truly reaching sad, cringeworthy levels now, invoking his wealthier parents' power as some last-ditch leverage tactic, as if I hadn't witnessed firsthand how toxic and unsupportive those monsters were over the past 2 decades. Your parents? Oh, Milford, you're killing me here. That's the best you've got left? I turned my focus toward Grace, wanting to make sure she fully understood how dire her current predicament truly was. No more secrets or half-truths about my husband's actual means, just the cold, hard facts laid bare for her to process. Listen up, sweet cheeks. The only thing Mill's parents ever contributed to our marriage was misery, trauma, and crippling feelings of inadequacy for their own son. So unless your grand plan is to spend your golden years toiling away as their indentured servant, as I did, I'd shelve those silly daydreams about riding off into the sunset on their dime. Grace looked like a deer caught in headlights, unable to formulate any kind of response as I just kept bashing her unrealistic expectations into oblivion. Wait, are you sure he's broke? Don't you get it? The man you risked your entire future chasing after isn't just broke. He's worse than broke. Dude's been chronically unemployed going on 6 years now, not earning a single dime to his name. I've had to work upwards of 80 hours a week, taking on multiple low-wage jobs just to keep his bum ass afloat before this whole sordid hospital stay. And like I said, his parents practically hate him. Don't they, Milford? You lied to me? You told me you had money. Well, that shouldn't matter, Grace. You said you loved me. What the hell would I look like being with a broke, ugly man? You lied to me. Ugh, you wasted my time. The more I revealed, the more I could see Grace's deluded fantasies crumbling all around her. She was super pissed too, yelling at Milford and telling him he was good for nothing. Milford just sat there in his hospital bed, hands covering his face, as the painful truth after truth poured out of my mouth. After I said my piece, revealing everything out in the open, I decided to leave without so much as looking at those 2 idiots. I left them to squabble, Milford still trying to save face by lying about this imaginary money he supposedly had. It was so pathetic, and it's honestly embarrassing to be associated with him. I, of course, reported Grace to her supervisor and the front desk and told them to check their cameras for proof, as I'm sure the 2 dummies didn't even think of cameras being a factor. I went home, packed Milford's crap, not like there was much anyways, and put it on the curb. I didn't care what would happen to it, just that I was in my own space now and had to pick up all the broken pieces.